Welcome to our video short for Mobile World Congress 2020. This is Susan Welch-Grimaldo. I'm an industry analyst with Strategy Analytics, and I look globally at service provider strategies. So it's a great topic we have here today. We're going to be talking about the big debate of this year, which is 5G consumer return on investment. So here to talk about the ROI for the consumer side of 5G, I have Alex Kuzvegi. He's the Chief Strategy Officer of VEON. Alex, I'd like to welcome you and ask you if you could kind of introduce a little bit what your role is at VEON and how you see 5G for yourselves this year and where VEON is on the 5G journey.
Thank you, Susan. It's a pleasure being here, although not in person, but still on a video link. The big part of what we do, of course, as a strategy, in a strategy function, is to look at the 3 to 5 year outlook for the company. And we actually have 10 companies under our auspices. So we have about 220 million subscribers, which are spread between countries as Russia, down to Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Algeria, and some of the other countries in CIS. So we're clearly looking at the 3 to 5 year strategic planning for each of our operating units. And you could probably appreciate that they're all in a quite different level of maturity, which is predicated on the economic development of the country, on the literacy levels, on the level of the disposable income available in the country. So the strategies for each of these countries would be quite different. Russia, on one hand, would be probably quite close to being a mature market in many ways. And then let's say Pakistan could be in some way a less mature market, and anything in between for all the other, so to say, 8 our operating units. So we need to really adapt whatever strategies we are developing for each of the market, given again what is the outlook for the development for each of these operating units. So the 5G clearly is something which is very topical for us. Luckily, it hasn't really taken, so to say, a big it has not become a big issue yet in our countries, but it is very much under discussion by every single government. Now, the way how we look at it is that, first of all, the way how we see 5G is that the 2G was all about voice, the 3G was about data, and the 4G was about video streaming. So the 5G in many ways, despite the fact that it is dubbed as the Industrial Revolution 4.0 or something like this, we actually see it much more evolutionary in a way that a lot of the 5G features which are at least available today probably can be achieved by the LTE Advanced, but basically by the 4G technologies as well. Second point is that we have several countries in our portfolio which actually have been granted 4G licenses only several years ago. So clearly we have not yet amortized the cost of those licenses yet. So in many ways, we're also not in a big rush to move to the 5G as soon as possible. Now that may not be what the governments may be thinking about, but at least, that is our thinking. For us, from our point of view, the further we can delay the introduction of the 5G, it probably will be better from the return on investment point of view. It's only 34% of all our subscribers across our 220 million subscribers use the 4G enabled smartphones.
Okay, great. It's very interesting to hear how very specifically, and I think that's a key point, is how you need to look at the market readiness of each market quite distinctly in terms of the base of subscribers there, their income levels, as well as your current network investments and where you are on that uptake. I'd be curious to hear, you talked a little bit about the governments pushing this. Do you think it's too soon and premature in some of your markets for, is the timing right for 5G this year? Should governments really be promoting and pushing faster? Or do you think it's better with where the ecosystem is developed today for you to take a little bit longer term approach in your markets for 5G, especially on the consumer side?
I think it really depends on what sort of approach the governments will take. If the government's approach is that, let's push for a quicker licensing of the 5G and actually charge quite a lot of money for that, as it happened, let's say, in many European countries, I would say that probably is quite a dangerous path for the telcos, because the use cases, even in the developed markets, are very questionable. So clearly the additional revenues which the companies might be extracting from deploying the 5G technologies are still very much untested, while the burden on a telecom company from the additional investments which it might have to undertake in order to fulfill the license requirements can be actually quite cumbersome and quite heavy. So in that sense, I would say if the government approach would be, we need to charge as much as possible, which could be understandable from a lot of governments want to see a quick, so to say, inflow in their budgets. That will be something which we will be, I can't say against it, we will have to play with the game, but we'll clearly not like that. Because I think that what will happen then, of course, is that it puts a big burden on the balance sheet of the telecom companies. It actually can backfire in a sense that we will have additional, let's say, interest pay, which reduces overall taxation to the government. So the government should also understand that there is a balance between how much you can push the ladder in terms of pricing the license and how much you actually want to achieve. The second approach, which we would be very much welcoming, is that a much softer approach. We're very keen to help all the governments who have very high digital economy agenda. They want to build digital prosperity in the countries. This is very much what it's close to our hearts as well. But if the approach here is taken that let's not overprice, or let's even maybe give up the licenses for free and effectively encourage the telecom companies to invest quicker, I think that approach is something which is much closer to our heart. Because we do see pockets of interest in various countries. As I said again, maturity-wise, for instance, we had a testing of the 5G technology in Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is very much high on the agenda in terms of pushing towards the digital economy. I think there, selectively, 5G can start work a bit earlier than in some other countries. So I would say that approach of a piecemeal, with understanding that we as telecom operators need to recoup our investments, and that investment takes a long time to recoup, will be very welcome.
And that's a very good point in terms of part of the real equation around the return on investment is that cost of spectrum up front and that ability then to be able to support the whole digital agenda. So I think that's a very good point. Let's dig a little bit further into the whole ROI piece here in terms of where do you find the upside and the down, the cost savings and the potential for revenue increase. Do you see in the consumer side, is the real benefit there going to be more on the cost to deliver increasing amounts of data for content, rich content, immersive, etc.? Or do you really think there are some more ARPU upsides and revenue opportunities on the consumer side, or is that revenue uplift more going to be on the business side? So how do you see the consumer piece in the equation? And assuming, like with most operators, the consumer is the bulk of the revenues today. So how do you kind of think through that with your teams as you develop your strategies and approaches?
Again, we're trying to learn what the examples of the other countries bring, and from what we've seen worldwide, most of the commercial launches of the 5G either happened with almost no increase in the pricing vis-a-vis the 4G, or a slight increase in pricing. And if you think about it from the consumer point of view, what does the consumer really get, and why would they pay more for effectively the service which they are already receiving as is? The higher speed and low latency, which is one of the, of course, big benefits of the 5G, is not really, so to say, felt by the consumer unless it is a very specific one. For instance, gaming. Somebody who wants to play games real time with a friend which is on the other side of the planet and would like to have very low latency and needs actually low latency to do that, maybe would be willing to pay extra. But probably 99% of the consumers will not be, first of all, in that category, and secondly, will not find that, so to say, extra service worthwhile paying a specific premium. So at the moment, in terms of the ARPU uplifts, we are finding it quite difficult to justify an extra payment for anything which 5G can bring today. Now, in the future, on the consumer side specifically, when augmented reality, virtual reality, maybe even tactile internet becomes a feature, then we can see that those specific things probably can be priced at a premium, and that can probably require some sort of repricing of our models. That's one part. Second part, of course, is any sort of smart homes, the IoT commercial, the IoT industrial. I think those are probably even further out, maybe 2-3 years down the line from the point of view of mass adoption, which actually would make a difference again for a telco. And industrial probably even further down the line, if you wish. So I think on the use cases from the ARPU uplift and the extra revenue generation, I would say there are more question marks. One technology, of course, which is interesting is fixed wireless access. And the fixed wireless access is looked as a substitute for the FTTH in the West, in many ways, a cheaper substitute. I would say for us, especially in some of our more developing markets where, let's say, the fixed line penetration is below 10%, we're actually looking at it not as a substitute, but as actually a complement to the mobile services. So if we can get, let's say, to a rural Pakistani family with our fixed wireless access, that is probably indeed something which can generate an uplift in revenues. Having said that, we have to, of course, match it with the fact that that particular family, if they have been deprived of any mobile internet, that probably was a reason as well. And the reason could be the disposable income. So clearly we need to match the ability, the depth of the pockets of the population we're trying to reach with the amount of money we need to spend on building the network. The other side, which you mentioned, is the cost side. And the cost side is somewhere where we could probably see quicker some of the benefits. I mean, it's probably spectral efficiency of the 5G should be about 3 times the spectral efficiency of the 4G. We have the virtualization of the networks. We're moving much more into the software, cloud-based services. So those things can drive the cost lower. The problem with the driving cost lower in the past was that a lot of telcos use this as an opportunity to cut the prices as well. As long as we don't cut the prices, and of course we benefit on the cost side, clearly we could increase the returns. But that, of course, still comes at the cost of first investing into the network. And that, as I said, the returns there, at least at the moment from what we can calculate, do not look extremely encouraging overall.
Certainly, perhaps a bit longer term out there as you move forward with getting to ability to do different things and pull in different partners as well. It might be interesting to see how that evolves. I'd love to dig a little bit more, because obviously once you do put that investment in the network, you really want to get people on the network to help generate some revenues, as well as the cost saving side of delivering the data sets. How do you think about driving consumer uptake of 5G? You said, some of your markets, you've got fairly low LTE penetration today, and fairly new LTE networks that could be delivering quite a lot of capability. How are you going to think about driving consumer uptake? And are there some key barriers you're focused on there in terms of getting more people onto these networks as you get them deployed?
Yeah, a very valid question. And I would say, given again that it took us probably 3 to 5 years to get 4G penetration to about 30-35%, I would say 5G uptake is probably likely to be even slower. Let's say from the moment we get the 5G, and depends again when it will happen, I would think that maybe a 20% penetration over the next 3 years will be a reasonable target which we could look at. And in terms of the enticement of the consumer, as I said, because there is no, at least for the moment, there is no revolutionary change between these two. It was much easier to tell somebody that, look, on the 2G, you only can speak. With the 3G, you can actually get data. And on the 3G, you can actually watch movies on the go. Those are very credible, clear propositions to the consumer, where the consumer might say, "Oh, great! I can probably think of paying a bit more to get, instead of an SMS of my cricket match in Bangladesh, I actually can watch it myself and have a look at it." So I think it will be very similar on the 5G. We wouldn't say that there is any specific plan how we would engage the consumer, except for the fact that it should be indeed the engagement. An engagement by means of offering them additional products or the services which are otherwise not available on the 4G networks. And as I said, that could be either the AR or VR or anything which we still don't quite know how to sell today, or it could be something indeed, an enhanced proposition on the speed, playing on the speed and low latency. Something where the consumer can specifically benefit for, again, I mean, I'm using this cricket because we have such a big popular so to say demand for watching the cricket games in Pakistan and Bangladesh, for instance. It could be football, let's say in Russia or something else. But let's say if people really want to watch the favorite game playing and having exactly the same moment, a high quality, high definition picture on their mobile phone or on their tablet, then possibly that will entice them to actually invest in the 5G, because that will enable them to watch this in much better quality, let's say, than the 4G. So it's really product, services, and really something which touches the consumer, because otherwise I don't think it will be easy to penetrate. None of the operators, of course, will consider, or at least tries to consider, any handset subsidies. That's usually is very short-lived, doesn't work, and in the end just destroys the whole market.
Great. Yeah, and I think that's interesting. It ties in a lot with what we've seen in some of our user experience research, that if you can find a way to really provide something new, real value, and wow the customers a bit on the experience, or really solve some of their pain points, as you said, with the in-home broadband and not being able to get that in certain areas, and then matching that up with the ability to pay and to be willing to make that investment as a personal level from someone for 5G for consumers. It's great to hear that focus that you have around how you're thinking about that, and perhaps it's a bit longer term than in some of the early 5G markets, and that's where it really fits, I think, with your strategy. So it's been really great to have your comments today. I'd love to have, just as a wrap up, what would be one really key takeaway that you'd encourage people across the ecosystem to think about, particularly perhaps if they have similar markets to some of the areas where you are, in terms of thinking about 5G for consumers? Is there any caution, any excitement, any advice that you'd really like to say, or learnings you've had to date that you'd like the whole industry to think about?
Well, I think one topic we haven't touched is really as I said, I mean, to engage the consumer and the customer is really about the products and the services. And I think when the telcos have been deploying 4G, the whole excitement or whole focus of the telco company was on technology, and the technology and excitement of what technology can bring, while actually forgetting what kind of products and services one can develop in them. And that created a whole host of the OTT companies, which of course benefited from the good technology which the telco companies delivered, but without the telco company really taking any slice of that big pie which the new tech companies have developed. So I think in the 5G, what will be probably the best strategy is for the telcos think not about technology, but again, the products and the services which will be in demand, and either develop or try to develop themselves, or try to be a bit more open. For instance, just open APIs and team up with the developers, which possibly are coming up with the products which we have no understanding yet or no idea, and let people kind of test grounds, check what is really working and what has actually traction with the consumers. And with that, being part of the stream, rather than just build the technology which other people will be using. I think that will be critical for us to really be able to, in the future, also to benefit from an increased ARPU, because otherwise we'll again become an enabler for somebody else.
That's great advice. I really, really appreciate that, Alex. And I think thinking about not just a service-based architecture and technology-centric, but being so much more focused on what you're bringing to the consumer and to other customers as well, and pulling in the partners and really opening up for innovation and creation of something that will be compelling out there. So I want to thank you, Alex, for your participation today. He's a Chief Strategy Officer from VEON, and appreciate all of you listening in to our short take here on this big debate on the consumer 5G ROI. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure being there.